You know the title. But I'll start with a picture. It's a picture that a friend of mine from Munich, a woman, sent to me a few months ago. It looks very self-promotional, as you can see. But there's a reason why I started with this. My late wife, Diane Middlebrook, who was a very distinguished professor of literature at Stanford University, was also the chair of the Feminist Studies program. And she once said something that to me was extraordinarily important, with which I'll start, that feminism is really a study of power relations between men and women in every context. I would like to talk today about the power relation between men and women in sex and reproduction. Throughout the history of mankind, men were always here, women way down here. When it came to sex and reproduction, also in other areas, but particularly that one, until very recently, men initiated sexual intercourse. They may do it through persuasion, seduction, brute force. They propose marriage. It's very rare the woman proposes this. In many societies, even now, men decide whether a woman will get pregnant or not. Now, that is a fact of life. What we forget, we men, is that biologically, the power relationship is completely opposite. We are here, and women are way up here. Why? We are totally inefficient. We shoot 50 or 100 million sperm into a woman so that one miserable sperm makes it to the egg. And then we're finished, totally finished. The other 99% of reproduction occur in the woman's body. That's not just humans, it's many other species. In most other species, the male doesn't even know who his offsprings are. A fish doesn't know who his son is or his daughter, and neither does a mosquito nor a snake, many of the birds, and so on and so forth. Humans are different in that respect. What I would like to tell you, and I'm particularly glad that there are quite a number of women here, and most of the ones who are here are obviously of reproductive age. I dare say that of the no, I mean that seriously, of the audience that of the audience that I saw here before, of the women, I would say 90% of you don't have any children yet. I suspect that close to 90% theoretically want some children at some future time. I'm reasonably certain that quite a number of you will not have them. And that will be the subject, really, of my talk. Now, this picture, things started changing a little bit with the invention of the pill, which was introduced in medicine in 1960. Very few people expected there would be used that quickly. Within 2 years, there were 2 million women in the United States that did. And right now, there are roughly 100 million women in the world who are taking the pill. What the pill did, it was obviously not the only contraceptive, but it separated contraception from birth control, from sexual intercourse. So in other words, it made possible sex without reproductive consequences. In 1977, and even more important, this invention was made in England by Edwards and Steptoe, namely IVF, in vitro fertilization. And that gradually exploded. Right now, and remember that's really only 30 years old, which is a picosecond or a femtosecond in the history of mankind. Well, 30 years ago, there are about 5 million persons in the world who have now been born without sexual intercourse, and I bet there's some sitting in the audience here, even though you may not know it. Your parents may or may not have told you that. But the fact of the matter is, 5 million in this extremely short period of time. But the overwhelming number, I would say, 99% of those instances were due to the fact that the parents, one of them, either the woman or the man, sometimes both of them, had reproductive difficulties and needed assisted reproduction in order to have a child. This will change dramatically, and that is my prediction, and that will be the subject of my talk today. First, some facts of reproductive life. There are roughly, it's obviously an estimate, but it's a good estimate, roughly 130 million acts of sexual intercourse every 24 hours. That is not the sensational thing. The important thing to remember is that roughly nearly 1% of these, another 1.2 million, every 24 hours, lead to fertilization. But of these conceptions, 50% are unplanned, which is still okay. But 50% of the unplanned are unwanted. And the result of that is that every 24 hours, there are roughly 200,000 abortions in the world, of which just about a third are illegal, with horrible consequences, emotional as well as physical. And per capita, the largest number of these occur in the all-Catholic countries of Latin America. Now, I'd like to talk about the mañana generation, which I think are you, the women who are sitting in this audience. And I use here as an example a quote from a very recent newspaper article in England, but you could have the same thing in the Standard or in the press or something here. Namely, the increasing fact that women of your type, and your type, I mean university graduates or the equivalent thereof, postpone childbearing. And the average age now in England of a woman of that generation is about 35 years for the first conception, compared to about 25 years for those women who do not have these educational ambitions or performances. The result being that many of you, if you're going to be grandmothers, will be grandmothers only when you're about 70. In certain societies, this has a real effect, because, for instance, in China, because grandparents actually play a very important role in raising children of working mothers. But let it go. I say mañana because women ignore, even though most of you are educated well enough to know this, that you're born with your supply of eggs, that when you're 35, in contrast to men who produce sperm all the time, so at age 35, you've lost 95% of all your eggs. That still leaves a fair number of ovarian cells, but they age very rapidly. And the difference between age 30 and 35, which is 5 years, and 35 and 40, which is 5 years, are two entirely different 5 years. And the really dangerous periods start already at 35, and most certainly when you approach 40 in many respects. And it's a biological clock for which, of course, women pay the price, you might say. And they pay a price for what? In Austria and Germany, used to be called the 3 Ks. And actually, interesting enough, in English, it'll be 3 Cs. But Kirche, Kinder, Küche, in other words, church, children, cooking, has now been replaced by another 3 Ks. But the one that you remove is pretty much a Kirche and convert it into Karriere. And of course, in English, same thing, you replace a church by career. Children become a child. Küche, well, you know, you can go to Billa and buy ready-made food, so you can feed yourself. I do it myself, so I know what I'm talking about. But why I say child? And here we get to the real problem. The average size family in Europe, and includes Austria and Germany, is about 1.5 children per family. You need 2.1 to reproduce yourself. So if you did nothing else but continue that way, then we all commit, I would say, national suicide over a period of a couple hundred years. And there are some countries that are on the way to do this quite rapidly, Bulgaria being one. We won't have the time to actually talk about this, but it would be an interesting one, because they often compare Bulgaria and Austria, which are 2 countries of just about the same size. But now, I'm not talking about what the scenario I'm describing now does not apply to the entire world. In fact, it's very important that we know about what we're talking about. You've had all kinds of talk about developing countries, and developed countries, rich and poor, agricultural and industrial. I don't divide the world that way, not in my teaching at Stanford, where I teach right now human biology, or did teach it. Namely, I think the world has to be divided into a pediatric and a geriatric world. And we all live in a geriatric world. If you think about, I am 3 times as old as virtually everyone here in this case. So but that is quite a range. That's quite a range. Many of you in your 20s, I had a 90th birthday 3 days ago, so you can sing happy birthday to me. Now, what do I mean by geriatric versus pediatric? On the right side, you see the typical demographic pyramid, which is well known throughout the history of mankind. Each segment of 5 years, so the bottom is 0 to 5, 5 to 10 years, and so on. And quite obviously, you have many more young people than you have old ones. That has changed dramatically since the last war, and particularly in the developed countries, Europe, for instance, and changes from a pyramid to a column. So you see the situation at the left side, that could be Austria, and the right side would be, let's say, Guatemala. What is more striking is how old the geriatric population is. And if you look at this here, with the exception of Japan, which is the oldest country in the world, all others are European. And you see they either have reached 20% of the population above the age of 65, or very rapidly approaching it. Austria, you see, is about 17%. It's on here. But that's increasing very rapidly. By 2050, Japan is estimated to have maybe 35% of its people above the age of 65. Who's going to do the work? It's not even a question who's going to reproduce, because they're obviously not reproducing themselves with 1.5 children. And the answer, of course, is rather obvious: immigration from other countries. But Japan is a very xenophobic country, and they have fantastic problems, but we're not going to address them today. But I just want to show you that the rest of it, Europe is the geriatric one. Let's see what a pediatric world is like. Well, here you see examples. With the exception of Afghanistan, they're all African countries. And you have up to 50% of the people below the age of 15. Now, that's an entire different world. And we're not talking about numbers. We're talking about the political, economic, educational, cultural implications of this, and in particular, the role of women in there, because I want to focus on that. And that is, of course, why, again, I had these, in the first picture, it was 2 women who put up my picture. They could have put someone else's up there, too. This is an interesting cartoon. It's one that I saw in Sweden. And that shows you really what the pharmaceutical industry in the world is doing right now. And that is what you need to know, because any drugs, any medicine that you use has to go through actually the 20 largest pharmaceutical companies in the world that represent 95% or more of all the pharmaceuticals. Well, on the bottom, you see the market that they're addressing. It's a geriatric market. You see one lady. She, first of all, is insured. She is affluent by comparison. And she has an incredible choice of drugs because she suffers from Alzheimer's or cancer or cardiovascular diseases, inflammation, diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. On the top, you have young women, in this case African, with their little babies. Their diseases are entirely different. There are parasitic diseases, there are diseases of the young, not of the old and aging. And you see it's a miserable drugstore. It has a few things. It may have a couple of antibiotics, some aspirin, or maybe an antimalarial. But that means, and that's very important for you to realize, that, for instance, contraception is not anymore of any interest to the large pharmaceutical companies. There's no male pill, not for scientific reasons. We know perfectly well how to make one, and there have been plenty of clinical experiments on this. But no pharmaceutical company in the world is touching that field, and there won't be any male contraceptive pill in the drugstore. None of you sitting here in the audience, I don't care. I think there was one kid here that was 5 years old. Even he, if it was a boy, I don't remember, will not be able to use a pill. That sounds pretty dismal, but you'll see it probably is not as dismal as I am making it right now. I decided to talk about this subject, not in the way in which I'm doing it right now here, which is more or less of an intellectual lecture or discussion, but in the form of fiction and plays, because I want to address these issues to a much wider audience. This book here is called Sex in an Age of Mechanical Reproduction. Incidentally, these are also all available in German my Austrian publisher, Heimann, has published them all. Here are two plays. One is called ICSI, and the other is called Taboos. I'm going to be talking about ICSI. Again, we don't have time, so I'd ask you to raise your hands. I bet the vast majority of you don't know what ICSI is. And of course, that's true. Why should you? It's an acronym. But how do I present it? I'll show you a very brief excerpt from the pedagogic play. So that's not a theater play. It's a play that I've written for schools, schools meaning a gymnasium or higher, people from, let's say, age 16 on. It's simply done as a, in German, I use the word Wortgefecht, which is a good word I can't quite easily translate into English. It's a combative discussion in a TV setting. A TV show before a live audience, assume this is it. There's a moderator, a young, very green woman, green political and otherwise very sophisticated, very suspicious of technological advances, and an older physician who knows a great deal about reproductive science. And here's a dialogue. Young blood is a woman. So say, what is ICSI, Dr. Frankenthaler? This is a TV program about ICSI. And he says, you know, formally, intracytoplasmic sperm injection. And she interrupts him because she's really smart and knows people don't pay much attention to words like this. She has one-shot fertilization. Sorry, I should have said that. It's a serious topic, but how about fertilization of an egg under the microscope by injection of a single sperm? Remember I told you you need 50 or 100 million sperm. If a man has only 2 million sperm in an ejaculate, which sounds like an awful lot, he's infertile. So remember, you need millions. So here, this was developed in 1991, an extremely important discovery in Belgium called ICSI to treat male infertility. So you need only 1 sperm instead of 50 million or something like that here. And Frankenthaler says, and she says precise and unambiguous, and he says, well, precise, yes, but unambiguous. Some viewers may ask, doesn't all natural fertilization involve entry of 1 sperm and egg? And then he says, may I tell you how to do this? And they proceed to do this here. But I will now show you, jumping now to a play. And it's a play, it's called An Immaculate Misconception, which in every other language has to have another title because misconception only in English has a double meaning. Missverständnis in German as compared to Missgeburt, let's say. Here you see, from a drama, this is an actual theater play that has been translated into 12 languages. This is from a production in Lisbon in a very wonderful theater. And you see here, what you see is a lab. And on the right side, you see a woman in front of a microscope who is going to be doing this one-shot injection. And on the left side, you have a physician who is watching what she's doing under a monitor. And that is actually how one really does it. One does it on a monitor. Usually it's not that large, but medical students or other people watch it while the person manipulating it. Now I'll show you very quickly. It's fun when you see in a real play an ICSI injection from the play. But I'll have to give you dialogue. There's no dialogue in here. So it's from scene 6. Now what you'll first of all see is a lot of sperm. And you see, these are healthy sperms. We're not talking, therefore, about infertility people. I now want to, because I'm going to say that we're going to use this naturally. So you see a lot of them. Now you got to find one. So you see the upper is looking for one. Now she has to crush the tail because otherwise it'll run away. Look at the capillary. That capillary is 1/10 the size of a human hair. It's that thin. Well, now she's immobilized it. She can now aspirate it tail first. Because now immobilized. And now you see the egg, how huge the egg is by comparison. And that is now fixed with another pipette, a suction pipette on the left side. And then you inject, instead of a penis, you have a pipette. And you have only 1 sperm. And just watch it. Now you see the ejaculation of that 1 sperm. And then the withdrawal. And notice that the egg, nothing runs out. It is very gentle. It's minute, as I told you. And there it is. The sperm is inside the egg. Now, 2 days later, 3 days later, that fertilization the next day, so you have 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, 16, 32, 64. Roughly at that stage, the embryo is put back into the woman, You hope that it then implants as in natural intercourse, and then for the next 9 months, it's a natural fertilization, a natural process, and the natural birth occurs. That is that's how 5 million kids were born since 1977. Just think how short a period of time it is. You know, this is a time before your parents, after your parents. I am essentially finished. About 100 of you will get, or have gotten, a copy of a book of mine that has just come out, my last autobiography, and it came out first in German, even though I write in English, and the English hasn't come out yet. And I do want to show you in the last slide why I suggest that you get that. Here's a table of contents. Each chapter can be read completely independently because it's not chronological. And the third one, which is called the bittersüße Pille, the bittersweet pill, is essentially the longest in the entire chapter. And what I told you here, which are really only sound bites about an absolutely critical issue, discussed in real detail in there, including especially my prediction about the future that will occur in the next 20 years or so, certainly within the lifetime, reproductive lifetime of many of the women who are sitting here. And I think it's something you should ponder. Thank you very much.